What if I told you that there's a concept in color grading which allows you to color grade pretty much everything, and that regardless of the software you're using? Yeah, you heard that right. The same principle applies for DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro, and everything else you might be using. In this video, I will show you exactly what this concept is and how it works in the application you're using. Before we get going, and I can't stress this enough, this is one of the, or if not the most important concepts in color grading, and if you watch this video from beginning to end, I can save you months of trial and error. I can promise you this because I see it all the time with my students. Almost all of them make mistakes related to this concept in one way or another. Let's start very simple. What is 1 plus 2? It is 3, right? So let's put that down. It's 3. Okay, and what is 2 plus 1? So if we exchange those, it's still 3, right? If you want to impress your friends in mathematics, this is called the commutative law. It states that A plus B is the same as B plus A. Without knowing the name of this law or being aware of this law in the first place, I noticed that many people think about the stuff they do with this law in mind. Let's make an example. For instance, you need to do the dishes and you need to take the trash out. The result you want is a clean kitchen. Some might say it doesn't matter whether we take the trash out first and do the dishes last. But let's be a little bit more strict here. If we take the trash out first and do our dishes after that, what do we do with our leftovers that we don't want to keep? So we could say that this doesn't mean we have a clean kitchen. As many of you are probably living with their partner, you know, here is a room for debate. For our example, let's just say doing the dishes first and taking the trash out afterwards makes more sense if we want a truly clean kitchen. Because we don't want any leftovers hanging around. Therefore, we need to do the dishes first and take the trash out after that. In color grading, it's the same thing. Some adjustments are interchangeable, but the vast majority of adjustments is not interchangeable. This is why the concept of order of operations is the backbone of every good color grading workflow. Because as we just learned, doing the dishes first and taking the trash out in that order is the only way we can achieve a clean kitchen. Again, the order is not interchangeable. So we just learned that the order matters. If we want to know in which order we need to put our adjustments, we first need to know in which direction the video signal flows. And this is true for every application, whether it's Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, or DaVinci Resolve. Heck, even in Photoshop, or Affinity, or GIMP. Imagine you want to apply one adjustment first and the other adjustment last. To be sure that they are in the right order, you need to know the direction the signal flows. Without knowing that, you just can't know which one gets processed first. It is really important you understand this, because if the signal flows like this, then this order is correct. Adjustment 1 on the left side and adjustment 2 on the right side. Because as you can see, our signal flows from left to right. This means the left side gets processed first and the right side gets processed last. But in some applications, the adjustments are stacked, like this. If the signal flows in this direction, then everything would be alright. But if the signal flows in the other direction, we need to change the order as well. I know this might sound super scary and complicated, but trust me, it's not. It's super easy and you can test it yourself. To show you that this truly matters everywhere, let's start in Affinity Photo. For the test, you only need 2 adjustments. For one, we need an HSL adjustment and a curves adjustment. I disable both of them for now. Inside the HSL adjustment, I want to reduce the saturation so our image gets black and white. And remember, we don't see anything because I just disabled these adjustments. Inside the curves adjustment layer, I want to go in here and go to something like my blue curve and introduce a very strong blue color cast. Something like this. Which tools you use really doesn't matter. What truly matters is that we have one adjustment that turns the image black and white, and another adjustment that applies a strong color cast. Let's enable both of these adjustments, starting with the HSL adjustment that turns our image black and white. Next, I'll enable the curves adjustment, and you can see the result is a black and white image with a blue color cast. This means the HSL adjustment gets processed first, and the color curves adjustments get processed last. Since these adjustments are stacked like this, we can conclude that the signal in Affinity Photo flows bottom up, with the input at the bottom and the output at the top. We can conclude this because we first have a black and white image and then a color cast. Let's get rid of my drawings. What will happen if I switch the order around? Let's do this. I drag the HSL adjustment and put it on top of the curves adjustment. Now you can see the resulting image is a black and white image. And this makes total sense because, again, the signal flows bottom up. This time, the color curves adjustment gets processed first, and the HSL adjustment gets processed last. Therefore, we have a black and white image as a result. But does that mean the curves adjustment does nothing? I mean, we still applied it to the image, so let's toggle it on and off. This is without the curves adjustment, and this is with the curves adjustment. You can clearly see the luminance changing, again, before and after. But the only thing that matters for this test is whether or not we arrive at a black and white image. And since we arrive at a black and white image, we can conclude that the signal flows from the bottom to the top because the HSL adjustment gets processed last because we get a black and white image. This applies to all video editing applications as well, but all of them have slightly different ways to apply adjustments. Let's have a look at the major three: Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Premiere Pro. In Final Cut Pro, I apply an instance of color wheels, go in here, and I kill all of the saturation, which gives me a black and white image. I go back out and call this deset. Next, I pull up another instance of color wheels, go in here, and apply a very strong color cast, so something like this. I go out and call this color cast. I disable this for now as well. If I now enable both adjustments, so the desaturation adjustment and the color cast, you can see that the result is a black and white image with a strong color cast. If we switch the order around, so I will take my color cast and drag it on top of the desaturation adjustment, you can see the final result is a black and white image. This means adjustments at the top of the inspector get processed first, and adjustments at the bottom of the inspector get processed last. Therefore, we can conclude that the signal flows from top to bottom, with the input at the top and the output at the bottom. Next, let's get rid of my drawings and both of these adjustments. You can also add adjustment layers or so-called adjustment clips. So I go to Edit and select Add Adjustment Clip. I will now duplicate this adjustment clip and call one desaturation, so desat, and the other one is the color cast. Okay, with the names in place, let's apply these adjustments. So I select the desaturation adjustment layer, go into my color inspector and pull the overall saturation. Next, I go into my color cast adjustment layer, into the color wheels and apply a strong color cast. But as you can see, nothing happens. What happens if I disable the desaturation layer? As you can see, the strong color cast is here. This means the desaturation layer gets processed last. And if we switch the order around, you can see the result is a black and white image with a strong color cast. Therefore, we can conclude that in the timeline, the signal flows bottom up, with the input at the bottom and the output at the top. This means lower adjustment layers get processed first, and the topmost adjustment layers get processed last. In DaVinci Resolve, this is a little bit more intuitive thanks to its node structure. For this example, please ignore these nodes at the end, because I still need to go from slog to Rec 709. But you can safely ignore these nodes. I now create two additional nodes, so here's one node and here is another node. With the first node selected, I desaturate my entire image. Something like this. With the second node selected, I now apply a strong color cast. And as you can see, the result is a colored black and white image. Since we already know how this test works, we don't need to switch the order around. We have a colored black and white image and therefore the signal flows from left to right, with the input on the left side and the output on the right side. By the way, the same is true for every individual node. This is the input and this is the output. In DaVinci Resolve, there are no adjustment layers for color grading. But there is something even better, the timeline level node tree. Let's have a look. Before we go there, let's delete our color cast node. Now, to get to the timeline level node tree, you can click this right dot up here. This brings you to the timeline level node tree, but you probably saw that the interface changed over here. So with this drop-down menu, you can also select either the clip or the timeline. Basically, the timeline level node tree will affect all of the clips in your timeline. Now, let's add a node. I need to connect it to the input, and I need to connect it to the output. Now, with this node selected, I apply a strong color cast. And as you can see, we have a black and white image with a strong color cast. This means in DaVinci Resolve, the signal not only goes from left to right, but it also goes from the clip level to the timeline level, with the clip level being processed first and the timeline level being processed last. Last but not least, let's talk about Premiere Pro. With the clip in my timeline selected, I apply an instance of Lumetri. I go into my basic corrections and kill all of the saturation so we have a black and white image. Next, I go to this drop-down menu up here and select Add Lumetri Color Effect. With the second instance of Lumetri Color, I go into the color wheels and I will just apply a strong color cast, something like this. The resulting image is a black and white image with a strong color cast. But in order to figure out the signal flow, we need to have a look at the effects pane. I go into my effects pane and have a look. So let's disable both Lumetri color effects. The first one is the one that desaturated the image. So I will rename this and call this desat. The second instance of Lumetri is the one that applies the color cast. So let's rename this as well. The resulting image we see is a black and white image with a strong color cast. Therefore, we can say that the signal in the effects pane flows from top to bottom, just as it did in Final Cut Pro. The desaturation adjustment gets processed first, and the color cast gets processed last. We can double check this if I grab this instance of Lumetri Color and move it before the other instance of Lumetri Color. And as you can see, we now have a black and white image, because now the color cast gets processed first and the desaturation gets processed last. Therefore, we concluded that the signal indeed flows from top to bottom, just as it did in Final Cut Pro. Adjustment layers in Premiere Pro behave exactly as they did in Final Cut Pro. If you want to see the test, please skip back to the section for Final Cut Pro. But if you don't want to see the test again and you take my word for it, let's imagine here's an adjustment layer and here is an adjustment layer. The signal in the timeline flows bottom up. This means adjustment layers at the bottom get processed first, and adjustment layers at the top get processed last. Now that we got the basics down, we need to talk about the most important implication of this concept. If you're working with raw or log footage, when do you transform your footage to Rec. 709? Super important question, because if you get that wrong, you will throw all of your precious dynamic range out of the window. You have probably been in this kind of situation. You have your video, which looks just fine as long as it's in its log state. But then you apply your LUT to Rec. 709 or your color space transformation to Rec. 709. Both of them just transform your footage from log to Rec. 709. But what's that? The entire video is blown out. Your next instinct might be to apply an instance of color wheels. You grab your offset and try to lower the exposure, and you do all kinds of funky stuff, but the footage just doesn't work out. This is the reason why so many people think LUTs are trash and then they avoid LUTs altogether. But the devil is in the details. Let's imagine that my video signal on my desk flows from left to right. This means the LUT or the color space transformation gets processed first, and only after that my color wheels adjustments are processed. Let's reset our color wheels adjustment. Now we need to change the order around. So I will grab my LUT or my color space transformation and move this behind my color wheels adjustment. Everything still looks the same, but look what happens if I turn the offset knob now. Isn't that something? All of my precious dynamic range comes back. This is a key insight, but why does this happen in the first place? The job of a color space transformation LUT or the color space transformation in DaVinci Resolve is to go from your recording color space to your display color space. For example, you want to go from your log footage to Rec. 709. One important thing to note here is that your log footage is this big and Rec. 709 is only this big. This happens because your log or raw footage captures much more information than we can put in Rec. 709. So the LUT's job is to map a specific input to a specific output. However, there are two things we need to know about LUTs and color space transformations. Thing number one is, in order to achieve a specific output, which is Rec. 709, they require a specific input. This means your log footage must be exposed in a certain way. You have probably heard terms like middle gray or 18% gray somewhere. This is a tool to judge exposure. I don't want to go into detail on this because the only thing you need to know is that the LUT expects a certain level of exposure from your footage and turns that properly into Rec. 709. To make this a little bit more simple, in order for the color space transformation LUT or the color space transformation in DaVinci Resolve to work, your footage needs to have a certain level of exposure. This means middle gray during a recording needs to have a certain level, and then the LUT or the color space transformation does all of its funky math, and at the end you will have a properly exposed Rec 709 image. However, if your footage is overexposed, then you won't get a proper Rec 709 image. The second thing we need to know about LUTs and color space transformations is that they cut off any information that goes outside of their range. So, for example, you have a little bit of wiggle room with your exposure, so you can expose a little bit too high or a little bit too low, and it will still get translated properly. But once you go outside of these bounds, everything will be cut off here and here. This means the LUT basically cuts off any information that it can't process. Are you ready for the full circle moment? We are almost there. Let's say my footage is overexposed, as it just was in the example before. If you now apply your color wheels to your Rec 709 image and try to push that around, there is nothing to be gained because the information was already lost. However, if we move our color wheels adjustment before the LUT, we are able to change the footage before the LUT. This means we can give the LUT or your color space transformation the correct input. So if I lower the offset, for example, I can make the footage fall into the correct input bounds. And once we have our exposure in check, everything works out and we get a proper Rec 709 image. As you can see, LUTs are not bad. There are just too many people out there who don't know the importance of a proper order of operations. Now it's time to apply what we learned to our video editing applications. Starting with Final Cut Pro, I go into my effects and apply a custom LUT effect. Now I go into the inspector and choose the correct LUT for this scene. This shot was shot on an FX3 using slog3 sgamma3.cine. So I go into slog3, slog3 sgamma3.cine. And as you can see, the entire image is blown out. If I now apply an instance of color wheels and I try my best to recover that, you can see it doesn't work out. There won't come anything back. Let's reset this. If I go back to the video inspector, we need to remember that the signal flows from top to bottom. This means in order to affect the video before the LUT, we need to drag our color wheels adjustment above the LUT. And this means the color wheels adjustment gets processed first and the LUT gets processed last. Now, if I go into my color wheels and just lower the offset, you can see how everything works out nicely. Even the blue sky is coming back here. Let's get rid of both of these adjustments and have a look at the adjustment layers. So I go into Edit and add an adjustment clip. I drag this on top of my clip, like so, and now I will duplicate this again. Now I will apply the LUT to the bottommost adjustment layer and the color wheels adjustments to the topmost adjustment layer. Something like this. And now I also need to choose the correct LUT. So I go into my Camter Rec LUTs, Sony, slog3, and go to slog3 sgamma3.cine to Rec 709. As you can see, the image is still the same. It's still as blown out as before. And if I go to my other adjustment layer to pull that back, you can see nothing works again. Because remember, in the timeline, the signal flows from bottom to top. This means we actually need to switch the order around. If I now go into the adjustment layer that carries my color adjustments, and I will pull down the offset, you can see how everything comes back nicely. In Premiere Pro, the same thing applies. If I go into Lumetri Color into the basic section and apply a LUT here, I will browse this and choose the correct LUT for this scene, you can see that everything is gone. And if I try to lower my exposure, nothing will come back. Remember, in Final Cut Pro, we were able to see the blue sky. But again, this is a matter of order of operations. So let's reset the exposure adjustment and go into my effects pane. I will select this instance of Lumetri Color and rename it. Let's call it LUT. Now I go into this drop-down menu and add another Lumetri Color effect. As you can see, Premiere Pro added it automatically to the bottom here. But the same thing happens. If I try to adjust my exposure, nothing will come back. So let's reset this and take this instance of Lumetri and put it before the LUT. Because remember, in Premiere Pro, the video signal flows from top to bottom as well, just as it did in Final Cut Pro. With the correct instance of Lumetri selected, so make sure you select the correct instance of Lumetri in this drop-down menu, if I now lower the exposure, you can see the blue sky is coming back. In general, I would recommend working with 2 instances of Lumetri. One for the LUT that goes at the bottom, and one for your adjustments that goes at the top. Because again, we want Premiere to process our adjustments first, and only then it should process the LUT. Alternatively, let's get rid of both of these adjustments. You can also use an adjustment layer and stretch it over your footage. Then select the adjustment layer, go into Lumetri and select the correct LUT. With the correct LUT selected, you can now go into your clip and just grade as you would. Because remember, the signal in the timeline flows bottom up. This means the Lumetri color adjustment from the clip gets processed first, and only then the Lumetri adjustment on the adjustment layer gets processed. And this is the correct order of operations we want to have. Inside DaVinci Resolve, let's use a color space transformation. I apply the color space transformation to this node and select the correct inputs and outputs. So this is Sony sgamut3.cine and slog3, and we want to go to Rec 709 with a gamma of gamma 2.4. Let's change the node label and call it CST. I add another node, and this time we want to adjust the exposure. But if I go to my offset, you can see we are out of luck again. Nothing will come back. This is because we have the wrong order of operations. I break up the connections and switch the order around. So let's put the color space transformation over here and our exposure adjustment over here. I will connect that and our exposure adjustment with the color space transformation, and then from the color space transformation to the output. Now we have the correct order of operations, because remember, in DaVinci Resolve, the signal flows from left to right. This means if I now go to my exposure node and lower the offset again, you can see how everything works out nicely. There is one very important thing to note here, so let's reset all the grades and nodes. There is a workflow out there which lets you apply a color space transformation at the start, where you go from your recording color space, so in this case Sony sgamut3.cine slog3, to DaVinci White Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. And then you add another node with another color space transformation, so I will just copy and paste this. Now I want to swap that around because I now want to go from DaVinci White Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate to Rec 709 with a gamma of 2.4. And this workflow wants you to do all your adjustments in between. So let's see what happens. If I select this node in between and lower the exposure, you can see everything works out wonderfully as well. This is completely fine and nothing will be lost, because your log footage might be this big and your Rec 709 target might be this big, but what happens in between is that you go from a large color space to an even larger color space, which is DaVinci White Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate. And then with your output color space transformation, you then go to Rec 709. This means it doesn't matter whether your footage is overexposed or not, because the color space transformation into DaVinci White Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate will accept a much bigger input. And again, you're going from a large color space to an even larger color space to do all your adjustments, so nothing will be clipped and nothing will be lost. This workflow is one of the only exceptions where you want to put a color space transformation at the beginning. If you find the workflow with color space transformations too cumbersome, you can also change the color management in your project settings, but I don't want to go into detail here, because you will find plenty of resources out there already. Just know that this is also an option. One important thing you need to know is that the order of operations does not mean that this is the order in which you work. This means you have your video file or your input. And let's say on my desk, the signal flows from left to right again. The next step with your log footage would be to apply a LUT to achieve a proper Rec 709 output. Because at the end of the day, you want to get an image that you can judge. Once all of that is in place, you can start making your adjustments. But the order of operations tells you to slide your exposure adjustment before the LUT. What I want to say is that even though the LUT or the color space transformation should be the last thing in your signal chain, in your workflow you still want to apply this first, because you want an image that you can judge, and nobody can judge a log image. So get your color management straight before you do all of your adjustments, but just know that you should put all of your adjustments before the LUT or the color space transformation. And this is the point in the video where you can be proud of yourself. You have learned one of the, if not the most important concepts of color grading. Once you truly understand and apply this, it will save you months of trial and error. But if you want to level up even faster, there's a way to shortcut this process. And no, this is not a pitch to some online course. This is one-on-one, just you and me working through your footage, your specific goals, and your workflow. I will meet you exactly where you currently are, and together we will get you creating outstanding images in no time. Click the link in the video description to learn more. And since you're still around, here's a little bonus. I'd like to give you my blueprint for a proper order of operations. I should note that this is just a framework, and generally speaking, yes, exceptions apply, but this is usually how I set up my signal chain. If needed, noise reduction goes first in the signal chain, because noise reduction needs the clean signal. Therefore, having it at the beginning of the signal chain makes the most sense. A close second to this is exposure and contrast. This is also where I shape the light in my scene. After that, I put my balance adjustment. This is something like white balance or setting the overall mood of the scene. Directly after my balance adjustment, I put my secondary adjustments, such as skin tones. The next thing in my signal chain is some kind of look, and last but not least, my color space transformation to Rec. 709, or whatever my deliverable will be. I should also note that these steps happen almost exclusively at the clip level, whereas the other two adjustments happen almost exclusively at the timeline level. I do these either on the timeline level node tree in DaVinci Resolve, or when grading in Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. This would be your adjustment layer which goes on top of your entire timeline. I said it before, but I want to say it again. The order of operations is not the way I'm working. This is just where these corrections are one after another. The order in which I work actually depends on a few other factors, and frankly, this would be too much for this video because this is already like an hour long. But if you're interested in building a solid workflow, you should watch this video next.